I think even, thank you. I think even the second line, 2021 to 2025, that probably should be 2022, maybe. I don't know. So if you see something that doesn't quite look right, make sure you bring it up and we'll take a peek at it as we go. So the first 2 pages are just a list of the funding sources, which will be a reference for later on when we go through the projects. If there's no questions on funding sources, I'll have you turn to page 39 and we'll go through these by department, and each department head then can comment if there's any questions. So again, primarily we're going to look at the fiscal year 2022 line. So it's the under that column, but you can see where we've got other projects throughout the rest of the 5-year calendar. So with that, we'll start with Brian on the airport.
The only item under 2022 is fuel farm design. The construction's tentative for 2023. This may or may not happen depending on grant funding. As you've seen, about 95% of it is funded between federal aid and state aid, and general revenue would be covered 5%. So it's not a huge city lift. That's all there is for airport.
Okay, next page 41, central garage.
Hi, I'm Amy Van Gilder, the Central Garage Superintendent. Starting off right away with equipment and vehicles for the city. The first item would be an airport utility / dump trailer for $17,000 being funded with utility revenue from the airport. And then we have to flip to the next page for the next item. The next item would be a SUV equipped with emergency lights for the assistant chief for the fire department for $41,000 coming out of the equipment fund. Questions on that? Okay, next one down is at the bottom of that same page. We have a hybrid SUV for the inspections department, and then we would move their current car over to the Friendship Center to replace one of the old vehicles that's over there. And that's being funded with their utility revenue. Okay. Want to flip the next page? Actually, we're going to do a couple pages here. Flip. The items that are listed on these pages that we're flipping are not being funded for another couple of years. So that's why we're flipping them here. So we're going to be to the page 45. And we're looking at the second item down is a Bobcat Toolcat for the park department. It's a UTV. It's used primarily for plowing sidewalks and sanding in the wintertime, and then also used for watering in the summertime. And we're looking at replacing that vehicle because it's used all year round, and having the old one go to the street department to use for spraying on the dike and stuff. So that's what that one's for. And then the next one down is replacing the plow truck for the park department as well. That's currently the sander truck. They have a sander in the back that's used heavily in the wintertime, and that's a replacement vehicle for them. The one right after that is the replacement of 3 patrol cars. We did not replace any patrol cars in 2021. So this would be for 3 cars in 2022.
Could I ask a question on that, please?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So I'm seeing in 23, no patrol cars.
Nope.
Reason for that?
Currently, right now, we're trying to get them on a 4-year cycle.
Okay.
Usually after about 4 years, our patrol cars have they have lots of miles and lots of engine hours on them.
Okay.
And we've found that after 4 years, we need to replace. So replacing 3 this year would leave us with not having to replace any in 2023. And then
Okay.
the next set would be 2020s that are going to be replaced in 2024.
Okay. So one more. I had noticed, have we typically done 3 per year, or is this somehow accelerated, or is this usual?
3, yep. 3, yep.
Okay. And we're doing this out of general revenue. Steve, you had helped me earlier, but help me understand why we're doing general revenue on police cars, but we're doing equipment fund for a car for the fire department. Maybe that's not your deal.
And Jessica might be able to chime in as well. We're trying to move these police cars from the equipment fund into the general fund because they go so quickly. We have to replace them so fast. The fire car is going to last many years.
Right.
Yeah, over 10 years.
Okay, how many years have it, and I'll be quiet after this, but how many years have we done police cars through general revenue versus equipment fund?
This is the first year.
First year.
Mayor,
Go ahead, George.
yeah, just from past history, Steve, and I think Michelle will remember this as well too. We normally always purchased 3 squad cars like every other year that we have done that. So
Actually, when I got on it, that wasn't the case because I got on right after the recession.
oh, okay, okay,
There was quite a few years where things weren't replaced
right. So
because we weren't increasing.
because normally it's
We weren't
done on a
increasing our
3-year
income,
schedule,
yeah.
so.
Right.
All right.
It's,
So this is new for me too.
And getting them to 4 years, I think, is really important.
yeah, we're trying to get to 4 years. We have 9 squads that are used on patrol, so it's really easy from an equipment and a parts usage standpoint. If we're replacing the 3 of them in that sequence, just for replacement and whatnot.
Chief, how many miles a year does a squad car get on? I know it runs constantly for the engines do. More hours than miles?
4 hours and miles.
Okay,
And if I can say, you look at them as cars, but they're offices for 27 people. So, and they get cycled down, so they don't come out of patrol as a marked unit and then get sold. They come out of patrol and go to investigations typically, and then the investigators' cars oftentimes will go to another city department, be it inspections or library or something to that effect, and then they end up probably at our auction. But they cycle their way all the way through, but the officers are driving them, for their 8-hour shifts, and that's their office. So we have different body types. So the seats get broken down. They're hard driving. They're emergency vehicles. They're not driving to the Twin Cities on highway miles and coming back, or driving from point of work to home and back. Like you say, they're 24/7, 365. And, as far as I'm concerned, comfort is just as important as the mechanical aspect of it, with heat, air, seats, and those types of functions.
thank you, Chief.
Mayor,
Go ahead, Michelle.
do we have money in the equipment fund for all these replacements in 2022?
If it's marked in here, we believe there will be.
Okay, just when I looked at our fund, I didn't think there was money to cover all this. So if there isn't, is that just taken out of the capital improvements for next year?
No, we'll figure out another way or remove it.
Okay,
There is still some truing up that needs to happen from last year.
All right, any other questions on squads? Okay. The next one, we're gonna skip page 46. There's none on there. There's none on 47 for next year. None on 48. None on 49. The bottom of page 50 is the replacement of 3 transit vehicles, 3 transit buses. These buses are funded 80% with state aid, and the remaining 20% is funded through partnership with the city of Goodview. Of that 20% that's remaining, the total, 10% is paid by the city of Goodview, and then the 90% comes out of the transit reserve fund to pay for those 3 buses. MnDOT has a replacement schedule for their transit buses that's deemed based on years and also mileage. So, Monica can request more, but typically they have their set schedule of how they replace them. So that's why you see the 3 funding sources, because each of them are broken down in there for the transit buses. Okay, and then if we flip over to page 52, the next item that would be up using utility revenue would be the Vector for the wastewater treatment plant. And that's replacing a 2013. And then we've talked with the idea of, do we want to move the old one to the street department? And we're thinking not, and we're thinking about just trading in the old one. Okay. And then next page has nothing. Go to page 54. We've got 2 items in there. The first one is a lawnmower, a 0-turn commercial lawnmower for the sewer department for their use, using their utility revenue for that. The next item would be also using utility revenue for the water department, would be a 1-ton with valve turning equipment. That vehicle outfitted. And then that would bring us to the end of the Central Garage equipment and vehicles for the city of Winona.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
City Hall?
We have two items proposed for the 2022 budget. The first is replace carpet throughout City Hall. We do have a few exceptions to that where offices have been renovated. This is from the renovation that recently took place. So the life expectancy of the carpet is past its life. Some offices are in good shape, some offices not. So again, we look at this more as a routine kind of a preventative maintenance item. The second is certainly larger item, probably greater impact. That's roof replacement is what we call it. Really, this is the City Hall roof has reached its life in 2020. We've pushed this out now for a few years. It does include some tuck pointing, parapet work, repair of the chimney that's on City Hall, and capstones. So total project for that roof replacement is the 385.
Okay, emergency management?
The first item, I believe, is the current base unit radios for all the squads. They have surpassed their useful life during our most recent squad switchover. One of those units, the radio head actually went out on it, and we called ANCOM, and they said they are no longer servicing them. Like with everything, unfortunately, they're getting to be disposable. So 5-year end of life on them approximately. When it comes to the base units, I want to replace all of them at the same time so that when the officers get in the squad car, they're utilizing the exact same radio across the board. So if somebody has a different vehicle, or if that happens to be broken down, then they get into the next vehicle and they're like, they're not familiar with the radio setup or the working. So to keep it consistent all the way across, we like to have them identical for every one of the cars so that there's not a learning curve. Or if somebody reverts to the old radio habits, then something bad happens. So they are willing to not take this all as one item. So we don't have to come up with the full $300,000 or $400,000, whatever happens, $125,000. They break it up for us based on payments and what we can do. Body worn in-car cameras. We've been researching body worn cameras for several years now. We've gotten extremely serious about it this year. We've already vetted 6 vendors and we have some pricing on that. Again, bad timing, but the in-car cameras that we've had for years are again out of useful life. They're out of warranty. Purchased an extended warranty for parts for the in-car cameras for those 11 systems, but the server itself that's housed over in Winona County, you cannot purchase an extended warranty on that. So the possibility, but we've got backup in place, but if something happens with that server, we'd be looking at that. So we need to update the current in-car system. And when looking at the body cam system, we want to have it on one platform. We don't want to have mobile vision in the squad cars and Panasonic on the officers. We'd like to have them all on one platform just to make it easier, and we don't have to deal with different vendors. Prices on these vary significantly, but what we've come up with through talks with these vendors is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $300,000. And again, that is able to be spread out over, basically they work with you to make it work for your department. And as you all know, the body worn cameras and in-car cameras are basically becoming a necessity. If you don't have video, it didn't happen. And one lawsuit exposes the city to a significant amount of money. And people want transparency.
And Eileen has a question. Tom?
Sure, Eileen.
I just wanted to clarify so the in-car cameras need to be replaced and then adding the body worn cameras and then having those all be on the same system.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anything else on those? The cell phone digital forensic equipment, again, this is something that we've asked for several years. What this does is it downloads people's cell phones and or desktop computers during a criminal investigation. and gives us basically the plethora of information that's located within those. So you know how much data is on your phone and how much is on your desktop as well. Currently, we have to send the phones either to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and they are extremely backed up, or we have to go to Rochester. And it has to be a very significant case involving a death or a person's crime being a robbery or something of that effect. And then we have to get the phone over to the Rochester. They have to do the data extraction. Then they send it back to us and then we have to analyze the data. Again, they are extremely backed up. So we are very selective in terms of what phones we give to them. There's 3 different pieces to it. There's called the Cellbrite unit, which actually does the data, pulls the data from the phone. There's Gray Key that then is able to analyze the data, and then the training that goes along with that. And that price came out at $45,000. And as I said, you know, if I look around the table here, I see every single person has a cell phone, and some have 2. So they're basically the part of modern day policing and investigatory tools. It's not fingerprint, it's DNA and cell phones. And then again, bad timing, but our MDTs are expiring, and those are the laptop computers that are in each one of the squad cars. The lease on those expires in June of 2022. And again, they've been in the cars for over 5 years, and they, like any computer, they've gotten to the end of their useful life. And we'd be looking, again, they work with us and would do it yearly. Again, it goes back to the aspect, do we want it as a line item in the police budget or do it as a CIP project? And the tornado siren replacement is not mine.
Mayor and Council, we have 9 city-owned tornado sirens.
It's on, just speaking.
We've kind of been nitpicking, replacing wiring. Everything's 20+ years old, and we're kind of losing the installation on the wires. And it's over the past 7 years we've been fixing them. And I don't mean to go off script here, but I would recommend maybe we push this back just to see what kind of federal funding we have coming down the turnpike as far as we're flush with federal money, and this is something we could definitely pursue through a grant. And yeah.
Is this not in partnership with the county? We never could get together with them, so we're just going to look at doing ours because we want to make sure we're secure. Okay.
And like I discussed in years past, a regional approach to this, it'd be more of a county approach. I believe we have 32 tornado sirens in the county. And I think doing a regional federal funding approach to it might be the best bet.
Yeah.
But if I could get this fixed, 2024 should have the same amount in it, 66,000. We spread it out over a 3-year period.
So your recommendation is that we don't try to fund it in 2022, but we do it in 23 and 24.
Correct.
In 25.
At least let me pursue the federal funding end of it. I just think if there's a chance for us to actually get something federally funded, it's going to be this year or next year.
Thank you, Chief.
Engineering, curb gutter, sidewalk.
That's our yearly program, $90,000 for city type sidewalk, which is our curb ramps, next to parks, next to parking lots, that type of stuff. And then $50,000 is just an earmark. It usually doesn't end up being on that much for assessment portion, but that's what the homeowners would pay on that portion.
Hey, Brian, or Mayor, just a question. Now, if someone is tagged for sidewalk repair, they can do their own repair, correct?
Yeah, it's always been that way.
And
We give them usually till the end of the year to get it done. Many times they try to hire a contractor and contractors are sparse. So a lot of times they can't find a contractor to get it done, but they always have that right to do it themselves. If they're handy and can do it themselves, they can do it themselves.
Can they do their own cement finishing to themselves?
They could.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. But you know, we'll inspect it afterwards, but generally they've done a good job.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Next one on page 60 is East End boat dredging. That's a request we got from council. About 80 grand is a estimate for that. And then we're back to fire.
Mayor and council, between our air packs and our hazmat air packs, they're all carbon fiber wrapped and they have a life expectancy on them. So what we've done over the last 2 previous years, we broke replacement of all the air packs down over a 3-year span. So this represents our very last replacement of air pack bottles. And they expire in 2023. So it's kind of critical that we get this done.
We're on to flood and storm control. We do have Burns Valley Creek outlet grading. It's basically from Homer Road all the way to the outlet near Fleet Farm is probably the best way to describe it. There's a weir outlet there. It's our responsibility to clean that area out periodically for our flood control management. Honestly, this got pushed a year or even 2. It's not the end of the world. Right now, it's a place mark. We are not inundated in that area, but it is something we are responsible for. So that could get pushed.
On to the library. Mayor and council, I have an estimate for repointing. About 30% of the library's exterior is missing mortar or has failed grout lines to the point that you can stick a full screwdriver in through the joints in multiple areas. So with water intrusion being an ongoing issue in our old stone building, I've got an estimate for $99,000. The scope of work included chemically washing the stone and then repointing and sealing.
Parks and Rec. First item is the aquatic center floor and wall resurface. This is again routine, really preventative maintenance project. This last completed in 2012. Life expectancy is 10 to 12 years. We're starting to see signs of wear. In conjunction with that, we've got kind of a 3-year project here to replace the original concrete around the pool deck. So again, not like a sun deck or a deck you sit on. This is like the concrete that supports the pool. Again, pool's in its 32nd year and we have not done work previously to this point. So it's in need. If we turn to page 68, top of the page, we did put a budget request in, again, primarily from Citizen Environmental Quality Committee to develop a community garden. And again, location, I think, is being determined by the mayor's task force, but we did put an allocation in for that community garden and the establishment of another or additional community garden based on that request. On the bottom of page 68, I know it, at least through council, sometimes through council comments, we've gotten discussion about the replacement of docks within our park system. So we've kept it more of a broad category here, but we would look at our docking. As an example, St. Charles Street probably is in the worst condition. So this is just an annual allocation for us to do some dock work within the system. If we go to page 71, bottom of page 71. We have the development of the Madison green space area. So we did, again, put an allocation in here. We did put a donation amount in this project. I think, as many of you know, when we purchased that property, we had asked the neighborhood that they, I guess, conduct a fundraising project, much like our other parks that we've recently done. With the city's investment in the actual land or the property, I think that we were very clear that that's the approach we'd like to take, was a community fundraiser, and then so part fundraiser, part city allocation. So again, general revenue and donation. 72, again, we had our final walkthrough with our architects for the replacement of the HVAC on Friday. Construction documents should be ready, or final budget estimate should be ready by the end of the month. So again, we are suggesting that the replacement of the HVAC system at the Masonic Temple again come forward for again review and approval of a funding source. Again, we've have at least discussed equipment bond up until this point. Again, I think there's resolution out there for the construction project, and then if we do bond, the reimbursement of the design costs so far. So estimate for that project's 1.8 million. Page 73.
Chad, I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So we missed the bonding cycle for the ERC. So I'm wondering if your thoughts are that the senior center will activate out of there for a while longer, or what you envision occurring now? Because we're another 2 years away from a state bond project. So, I mean, what are you envisioning? Because to me, if there's not a use for it, I would push that 1.8 million again till when we do a bond project. But I'm not sure what we're looking at. If the senior center is going to be activated and used there, then it's a bigger need, but I'm curious what you foresee.
So mayor and council, I guess there's two avenues to take. One is if we're going to pursue state bonding, then yes, we're 2 years out. And then again, construction time as well, which means Friendship Center would need to occupy the space in the first floor. We did do, I guess for lack of a better word, a Band-Aid fix for the air conditioning unit for the first floor. So again, I think it's important to know it's air conditioning. It's not necessarily the full HVAC system or air handling unit. The hope is that that would get us through a couple of years, but again, it was a Band-Aid fix. Again, larger discussion certainly is if we don't do state bonding and we look at other avenues to bond, either whether it's with another project or with the HVAC project with the community center. That's always an option for obviously local bonding. If we want to move that project forward in a, I guess, quicker fashion.
But do you envision moving some of the senior center over to the East Rec Center at this time, doing some programming there? Or you envision them staying in the Masonic in total? Because I mean, that changes the discussion as we move forward for me, like what priorities should happen and in what order.
Mayor and council, it is a really excellent point, because although possible, if you can envision moving all of our operations, which includes advocacy, which I think is an important piece to remember. It's not just the programming of the Friendship Center. Moving advocacy out or relocating them for a period of time to do an HVAC project. If a decision hasn't been made in the community center, they would move out, move back, and then potentially move back out. So there is some logistics that certainly need to be worked out and discussed. Again, is that impossible? No. But I think if you're looking at timing and how construction schedules work and logistics, that's something that we need to consider.
So does that mean in our future, there'll be a bigger discussion about the East Rec Center and this project in our future? Because I think that might be helpful when trying to look at this process. It's hard in this setting to have that conversation, but is that something we'll be looking at doing?
So mayor and council, timing wise, I think it's an important discussion during the August budget meetings, obviously. We will have better pricing on the HVAC and the community center. Both are really scheduled to be due by the end of July, working with our consultants. I think when we last presented the community center, though, the second half of that is that we're working on that financial plan to see, again, debt capacity, other avenues for funding sources, how it relates to the public safety building, et cetera. So I I think that in the budget meetings in August, though, that we certainly need to have more discussion about this and order and priority. Yes.
Go ahead, Eileen.
I have a question, I guess, that would go along with what Michelle's asking, which is one of the things that the city has prioritized as far as the Masonic is having it in use more often, and does pushing back making the building inhabitable half of the year mean that there are less opportunities for generating revenue through rentals and things like that. I mean, there's office space that is not used, there's performance space that can't be used most of the year. And I know because of the air handling, there are very few sort of professional attractions that can be brought in. So that means none of that can happen anytime soon. Is that correct?
Mayor and council, that's correct.
Okay.
I think to your point further, I mean, we know that if certain organizations want to use that and use professional paid actors, there's certainly requirements that that space has to meet from an air handling and HVAC component. And then again, yes, if you walked up to the second floor of Masonic today, you'd last about 5 minutes in there. So it's hot.
Thanks.
Top of page 73, again, to use the term, this is a budget item that really is a revenue and an expense. So we're going to have revenue coming in from the state of 2 million through the bonding project for the Riverfront Trail. And again, we'll expend, 2 million. So this is really just we need to make it sure it's in the plan, in the CIP, and then from a budget standpoint that we show both revenue and expense. So this is not you're seeing the expense side, but when you get the budget books, you'll see the revenue side as well. So again, from a tax levy standpoint, this is neutral. The next item on 73 is we are continuing to try and replace the remaining pit toilets at Prairie Island. So we've done half of them. Again, this is the second half. This got pushed back last year as well. So this is that project. On top of page 74, again, it's kind of a recurring theme here tonight, but the campground shower facility and camp store, two separate buildings. One, the shower facility is, again, past its life expectancy. There's some major repairs that need to be done. That facility, and again, in high water events, the camp store spends most of the summer underwater. I mean, so upgrading both of those facilities is important. This is just to say that, again, like we've done with other facilities like Bud King as an example, Masonic Temple, library, we need to kind of we need to study the structural components of that building, make sure that maybe it can be renovated or if it's a complete new build. So we did put some planning money in for 2022. Bottom of 74, this has been in the budget for a few years, but we do again note it because we did receive a donation of 20,000 for Rose Garden improvements. We'd like to see some component of city dollars come in to match that or go above that to make sure that we have a solid project. The 20,000 certainly is great. It's a great start. It doesn't exactly get us through phase one. So we've allocated or at least suggested some additional money to come forward there as well. Page 75, we did do this project also as a donation and fundraiser. We think we have a fairly good lead on a donation for the Sobieski Park Court. So this is, in a sense, splitting that project, well, not quite half, but close to half from donation and then tax levy. So that would improve the hard courts, basketball, tennis, and pickleball courts at Sobieski. I think then we move to page 76. Every year, well, at least for the past 4 years, we've been placing a trail redevelopment dollar amount within the general tax levy. You'll see the items that come forward tonight that typically if we write grants for trail development, we need a match. So we've been trying to budget that match because we're in this cycle with legacy. Last year, we took it out But again, we try and put it in as a placeholder every year. The Valley Oaks playground equipment, again, recurring theme. Again, the playground is past its life expectancy at Valley Oaks as well. We're estimating 86,000 to replace that unit.
Mayor, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Do you know how old that playground equipment is?
I don't.
Okay,
I don't know the date, sorry.
that's okay. The reason I ask is there were some other items in for the next few years as far as playground type things. And I know we're not going to come up to some of them for another year or so, but for example, the Dakota Street playground was taken down, but we don't have a theoretical budget for that for another 3 years. And I find that concerning. And there is something about putting a softball field at Dakota near the West Lake, and that is not until next year, and it is less than what would be allotted to fix the pitcher's mound in Gabrick. And I just am a little concerned that there seem to be particular areas of the city that are considered and budgeted for, and there are areas and recreation spaces that seem to get little to no attention. And I hope we can address that in the coming years.
And then the bottom of page 77 is the, again, bond, I guess, request or recommendation for the construction of the community center that we just previously discussed. I think that's all in my area, but if I could just for 1 second, I missed something that I just want to make a note of. On page 66, we do have the band shell improvements. I know it's a year out, but I did want to note that because we are starting some work with the study already. But again, this is always a good venue to say that the 100th anniversary of the band shells in 2024, and so we're preparing to do major renovations to that facility prior to that 100th anniversary.
Is 285 a placeholder? Because it feels to me like that's low.
It's a placeholder at this
Okay.
point. And likely low.
Port Authority, page 78.
So on page 78, this is a public portion of a parking structure downtown. This would only be funded if there was a revenue stream of TIF, and we're showing that over a 2-year period. Again, this is a placeholder for that structure that we have in our future. And the majority of it would be in 2023. The next project is the Mississippi River connection and dock expansion, linking our riverfront into the trails downtown. I have 2 million in federal money and $1 million in state aid. This was the last project that the Port Authority had for its typical Minnesota request every year. And there was a discussion at the legislature that part of the federal money the state received could go for some of those port projects. And this was our most recent port project to make improvements so that as the riverboats come in, we have better accessibility and better connection to the river. And it also includes improving the rail storage yard area. So these are some markers that, again, they're general fund revenue neutral. We would only do it if we had those funds in place. And also there might be an opportunity to apply for grants, and often they ask if it's in your CIP to do a project. So that's why they've been placed in the CIP for this year.
Sanitary sewer. I think Lucy wanted to talk about that.
I was hoping she would take over. I wouldn't mind it.
She wouldn't let go of the microphone.
The first 2 items are for list station number 5. It's listed twice, but it's really one item. Been replacing some of our aged lift stations with the new Yusemco type of pump, wet well, dry well situation. Cleaner, easier to get into, don't have confined space. This is another one that we've been trying to do is a sewer lining project. Throwing 100,000 plus or minus at it a year. We did one last year out by the airport and we lowered the amount of fluent to going to that lift station by nearly 150,000 gallons a day. So these things kind of pay for themselves. So that'll add a lot of years to that lift station and a lot less treatment at the plant. The next one is our Mankato Avenue sewer replacement. We'll be doing replacement / lining as long as we have the street open for the Mankato thing. It's a opportune time to take care of some of that sewer. And on the bottom of page 82 is replace our electrical building at the treatment plant. A lot of our electricity down there because of the caustic environment is not doing well. So this would be a building to protect that and be portion of the phosphorus mandate coming up. And I think that is it for sewer. So I'll go right into storm sewer. We got a $200,000 earmark for storm sewer for alleys, and that's if and only if the council would decide to do the alley renovation project where we assess the 75%. Yeah, and that's all we have for sewers in 2022. On to streets, and that is the project I just mentioned with the alley renovation. This would be 10 alleys plus or minus 10 blocks worth of alleys plus or minus throughout town. Obviously, people know that our alleys are seen better days. And this would be a start renovating those alleys and get them so they're not complaining. The thought process on this is the alleys, unlike a street, are predominantly used by the homeowners. Therefore, that's where the assessment rationale comes in. Not uncommon for a city our size to assess alley improvements. Do you know much about this one?
So the item under streets for the downtown streetscape improvement, this was in the budget or in the CIP, I should say, for the last few years, and it's to redo 3rd Street between Lafayette and Center. We had some designs and drawings done to make that a focal point. And so that's what that project is, put together by the planning department.
The next one is our street mill and overlay program. This will probably not be 1.5 million. It's our yearly, we've been typically right around 860,000. What it'll be next year is a little bit yet to be determined, but it's our earmark for our mill and overlay program. The next one is our Mankato Avenue project. Some of it will be cost shared for state aid streets. We have Frontenac, which is a state aid street, and the northbound Mankato is also a state aid street. So we've got a placeholder of about 900,000 for that. There will be some city costs because like Riverbend and Parks Avenue are not state aid streets. So we'll have a little bit of cost share on that. It'll probably be closer to 450,000 under general revenue. And our next one is on page 89. Park signage, is that another? I'm not sure what that one's about. Is that?
I think that is continuing some of the placemaking signage that we put together in planning. And that would be between Broadway.
Wayfinding signs?
Yep,
Okay.
wayfinding.
Okay. Our next one is preemptive traffic control system. It's earmarked for 25,000. I have talked to MinDOT, and the ones that are on Mankato currently, they are going to allow us to recycle, so this cost may come down. Kurt and I will talk on where we should place these from now, the 3 different signals. We'll talk on where they would best fit, but this might be a little bit lower than that. The next one on the bottom of page 89 is our state aid project. We're projecting to do South Baker Street from 5th and Sarnia. About $1 million with utility revenue, which would replace our sewer and water at about $500,000, and special assessments, probably a little bit high at 80,000. We basically replace older water services, opportune time to do it. And that smaller cost, usually around between 1,500 and 2,000 per service, would be assessed to the property owner. The last one on streets on page 90, on the bottom of page 90, is the Walnut Street Railroad crossing, estimated at $90,000. And that fulfills our street program.
Mayor and council, I didn't want to interrupt Brian in the middle of his Mankato project, but did want to mention, because of the city cost share placeholder for 100,000, within the budget, you may also see we're working on the possibility of having a parking structure at the Sugarloaf trailhead, so we get the traffic off of Westlake Boulevard during that project. And again, that would be a shitty.
You said 2 things.
Freudian
First,
slip.
first that, but also structure. It's not really a parking structure, is it?
Parking
lot? Thank you.
Sorry.
Just to clarify, this
Freudian
is for
slip.
people using the Sugarloaf trail system instead of parking on Westlake. You would have a place where they could go, a nice place.
A nice place, not a,
I'd like everybody to say city share really 10 times really fast. But Brian and I are working on adding that. And so I know he said that the 100,000, it may be more. The park rec budget would also have additional within the budget, a cost for that possibility to happen. We think during that project, that would be the logical time to do it. So we're gonna, advocate for that to make it in the budget. So
Yeah, I've talked to MinDOT. MinDOT owns the grass land just south of Lake Boulevard, and they'd be willing to probably just deed that land to us with the project. So we're not going to have much of a city cost as far as land goes, but there will be grading and possibly rock. We may or may not pave it at this point, but fairly kind of a no-brainer on our part.
Okay, next up is transit on page 92. I have 2 projects for next year. The first one is very likely to happen. That's just replacing the roof on the transit shelter at 3rd and Center. The second proposal is for insulation and putting heaters in our transit bus garage, which is located next to the central garage. I will be making a grant application to MinDOT for that, but it sounds like that one's not likely to get funded in 22, but I'll still make the application, and hopefully that'll get funded in the following year.
Next up is water mains. Our first item would be Johnson Street media replacement for $500,000. It's a typical about 20-year life on this, and the 20-year life is coming due next year. Basically take all the green sand out of the filter and replace it with new green sand. And the sand, no, is not actually green. That's just kind of what it's called in the industry. The next one is another earmark for Mankato Avenue water main replacement. Again, opportune time to do it during the project when the streets ripped up, et cetera, et cetera. So that's our earmark for that project. Next one is well 14. Basically, wells have a lifespan and this one's coming due next year. It's on the program to replace, so that'll get replaced next year. And that is the end of our water main for next year and also the end of our CIP.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate it. I will step over to Luke Sims and we'll discuss the new motorized foot scooters, micromobility and shared transportation system regulations.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Today we are here to discuss some of the staff considerations for shared micromobility, primarily motorized foot scooters. City staff feels that it's important for us to have an ordinance on the book before any shared micromobility comes into the city, and we end up like other cities such as San Francisco and Minneapolis with hundreds or thousands of small scooters strewn across the city of Winona. The proposed memo, which you should have forwarded on to you today, does outline a number of different considerations. After having discussion with the city council today, city staff will work with the city attorney's office to draft a formal ordinance and bring it forward to the city council. The draft considerations before you today were pulled together after looking at the micromobility recommendations from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, the ordinance language from surrounding cities, including Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, Albert Lee, La Crosse, among others, as well as looking at the statutory regulations for Minnesota state statutes regulating motorized foot scooters. So the goal here is to really establish that we have consistent definitions with the state, consistent regulations with the state, and then a clear understanding of what will be required of any operators entering the city of Winona. There are a number of operators that have begun having conversation with us at city staff, and they've all been incredibly kind and willing to wait until we pass an ordinance before they deploy 100 scooters or 200 scooters on our shores. Specifically related to today, city staff is looking for general discussion and feedback, as well as I'd like to draw your attention to a few components listed in the memo before you. Specifically C1D, which does limit the number of operators to 2. This is a discussion item compared to the overall fleet size of 25 also proposed, which is in C5. The pushback we've received from operators is that they prefer to see a fleet of 100 or a fleet of 50 at the bare minimum. So for your consideration, I'd like to hear any feedback related to the overall numbers related here, maybe changing from 2 allowed at 25 to 1 at 50. Similarly, where we differentiate from the overall regulations from the state is in relation to everybody being required to wear a helmet. That's found in the establishment 1 clause there. The state only requires for ages 12 to 18. And then similarly, we also do have a member of the public who has brought up a need or a desire to see these be allowed to be operated in public parks. However, the staff consideration before you in item 5A6 is that it would be consistent with current park regulations to not allow motorized foot scooters where motorized vehicles are prohibited. And with that, I turn it back to you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Luke. Steve, do you have a question?
I do. Luke, thank you for your work on this and glad that we're being proactive rather than reactive. On your final page there, I noticed something, a valid driver's license. So I've rented these before as I've traveled, and you know, it was just wham bam credit card and scootering. I did so in Kansas City, incidentally, and obviously it takes a bit to validate a driver's license. So is that common? Are we sure that that's common in other cities? I mean, that's a bit of work to truly validate a driver's license.
Yeah, this was a concern that was discussed pretty at length with city staff in general. We did decide on requiring a valid driver's license, the idea being that these are motorized foot scooters that have a motor that go up to 15 miles an hour, and we are requiring them for those who are going to be using a service that we are licensing with the city. So we are requiring them for those who are going to be using Lime or Bird or Scoot or what have you. However, we don't have that same requirement for somebody who would own their own motorized foot scooter, for example.
So would you be envisioning that when you rent one of these, when I happened to rent the one that I did in Kansas City, it was swipe your credit card and go. It was very, very simple. So to run a driver's license, I do this in my occupation. It takes, and to validate it, that takes a little while. So is this going to be like a booth, an establishment, a shop that you rent these from? Or is it possible to do on the street by just swiping a license?
You can scan a driver's license to quick photos front and back. Many apps do support that. We have not had any concerns from the operators that we have discussed this with, which has been reviewed. In particular, that's how we know the pushback related to the overall fleet size. Additionally, Minneapolis, for example, does have that driver's license requirement. So it is definitely feasible to implement.
All right, thanks. Just got to ask. Yeah, the helmet thing, I don't know. I guess my personal view is that we're personally responsible for ourselves and our safety, and certainly to under 18, I could see requiring a helmet, but above 18, I think I'd prefer not. Be my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Mayor, I think I'd second the comments on the helmet rule.
Okay.
I think an adult should make a choice if they want to wear a helmet or not. After reading through this, am I correct in saying that they would not be allowed on, say, the lake, or to go around the lake then? Because that's considered river trail, or that's considered, as it says, shall not operate on city parks and trails. So somebody renting that scooter would not be able to go around the lake then? Is that correct?
Yeah,
That is correct. That's consistent with current regulations for no motorized vehicles on the Lake Park path.
Okay.
Thank you, Luke. Eileen, you had something?
I had a question that just sort of was a technicality based on the comments that Steve brought up and something you mentioned, Luke, about people between 12 and 18 having to wear helmets, but if it's requiring a valid driver's license, then theoretically no one under 16 would be able to rent these, correct? Okay, great.
Farmer's permit.
Thank you for the clarification.
Luke, are you asking us to reconsider because of fleet size, this part of the ordinance that you presented to us? Because actually, when I read that, 25 seems very small for a city our size. Actually, I mean, if you consider that someone might have rented it and taken it out to Target, and then you have two other people that come up and want to tour the city, and then the next thing you know, there's no mechanized scooters there. I mean, I would think just for the sake of argument, they would need to have more on hand just to allow for the come and go or the lay between use. I don't know. I would be okay with upping the amount to be more appropriate for a city our size. We're not, there's not only 2,000 people here. We're supporting 2 colleges and a tech school. So to me, I would assume they're going to be the heaviest users, high school and college kids. I'm not like Steve. I'm a little leery of mechanized. Anything that I can't control. I like to be in the car, but I am assuming a lot of people are using this are going to be younger people either, or people that don't have access to a vehicle. So just for my part, I would be more comfortable raising that than maybe what we originally considered. I would look at some recommendations from their companies and what other cities allow.
Luke, this is Mayor Sherman. The one question that I had from this was, what was the procedure for determining those amounts?
The procedure for determining those amounts was the initial push from the operators to deploy 100 scooter fleets. And then the goal to make sure that we have some level of control in terms of paring that back. So that's why we landed on 2 operators with 25 total, which would be the total fleet available to the city of Winona residents of 50. Obviously, we're not tied to that language, and we're seeking direction from City Council. So if the goal is to provide whatever is fiscally feasible for the operator, they would really prefer 100 or 50 at a minimum. If we do lean in towards something like 100, city staff, myself in particular, feels that it would be important to limit the number of operators to 1 until we find our feet. When we initially get these, we will probably get a number of phone calls that go something like this. There's a foot scooter in front of my house, and they're not going to specify that it's Lime or Bird or Scout or what have you. And we're going to have to try and figure that out to make sure that the initial operator is actually going out and retrieving that foot scooter within the 24 hours required.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor.
Michelle.
Just out of curiosity because there's a lot of rules for not only the company that deploys, but the user, how are we going to enforce this? Are we going to have a scooter patrol out there, a bike patrol? What are we going to do? Because it seems, I mean, to be honest, I don't want to waste a ton of time with the police having to take phone calls for this, which is that was my only concern. I would be okay with 2 operators because I think for the sake of the user, having 2 companies that have to compete for price is better for the user than letting one company move in, establish their place here, and then try to have one come in and compete. I understand from our perspective, it'd be easier, but from a user perspective, it wouldn't be. But I'm just wondering what the chain of events is going to be here. Because what if they call the police? I mean, I don't want to send out a patrol car for an abandoned mechanized scooter. That was my only concern, the user problem.
The response that we've received from other cities is that typically by requiring that you have a localized operator or a representative of the operator, that they do actually take care of these in a fairly responsive manner. It is their brand, it is their business, they want to be well received. And because these are licenses directly with the city of Winona, we would be able to say, listen, you have not been a good faith operator over the last year, we're going to be canceling this contract going forward. So that's really the kind of the stick at the end of that carrot. So they have the ability to operate here, but we can always revoke that license or move past them in the next year. Steve, it looks like you were going to say something, sir. Never mind.
He was just adjusting his
Well,
mic.
then I would just say for my part, I'm so pleased that you came up with something before we started moving them in. I am very comfortable with increasing the amount of scooters. I am comfortable with the helmet restriction, primarily because we're already requiring a license. That means younger kids aren't going to be using them. And I'm also comfortable with allowing more than 25 per. I mean, just if you're looking at overhead and their costs for having an actual facility here, I just can't imagine even the 25 would even make it worth their time. So, I mean, those things are things I would be comfortable with changing in this ordinance, I guess, or license agreement.
Steve, go ahead.
Luke, do you anticipate that this would be more tourism or transportation?
That's a really fun discussion that a lot of cities grapple with. I've found that in discussing with other city staff at different municipalities that really having centrally located toward a downtown is going to have more impact. Fortunately for Winona, our downtown is directly adjacent to some of our prime recreation and tourism hotspots, our historic districts, our river, our levee park, etc. So I would expect that it's going to be a pretty common mix. I imagine that we'll see younger users use it more for transportation. That's both just a reflection of demographics that are willing to pick up micromobility options, as well as the fact that it's going to be fairly cheap, much cheaper than bringing a car to campus than, walking or biking or what have you. It's going to be a really easy option for a lot of them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Luke. George, go ahead.
Who would carry the liability insurance on this?
The operator would carry liability insurance and indemnify the city.
So the city would not have no insurance involved in this.
That's the basis there, yes.
So if I'm out on one of those scooters and I get waylaid out there on 2nd Street, it would be my insurance that would cover it.
It would be either your insurance or the insurance of the operator. And
Okay. Thank you.
But we would still be responsible to respond. So you'd have fire, police, ambulance.
I've had those before.
Any other questions for Luke at all?
So what I'm hearing is more than one operator. 50 seems to be okay, maybe 100.
50 each.
Correct, not total. And a little fuzzy on the helmets. Maybe I hit my head too many times, but I hear no helmets and I hear yes helmets.
I heard under 16 to 18.
Okay.
Yes, helmets, 18 and up.
18 and up. Smack, yeah.
And
All right.
even though your brain is not finished developing till you're 25, just want to add that in.
Is Chris Hood on the line? This is Mayor Sherman. I have a question for you.
I am Mayor, yes.
Would this expose us at all if by changing any of the helmet propositions there?
Well, there's no state requirement. There's nothing that requires us to have helmets. As was just mentioned related to the liability insurance, the company would be carrying the liability insurance on it and or the person riding. So the city does not have specific duty to, provide liability for that. And this would be effectively a license agreement with the provider. And so that would entail the provider having to have, again, in our license agreements, we typically specify a certain level of insurance that covers the maximum tort liability limits under the Minnesota Tort Claims Act for the city. So we would want to make sure that they have sufficient insurance coverage to indemnify the city for any claims that would be made against the city.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Chad?
Go ahead.
Mayor and council, maybe Chris can help or Luke can help, because I know we talked about it at the staff level, and since there might be a little bit of gray area on the helmets. My only concern with the helmet is I'm 18, I run my driver's license, then I hand my scooter to my 12-year-old brother. So is there any harm and foul in just saying helmets required or helmets recommended, something within there that just says helmets should be worn? I get it, 18 and up, you're an adult, you should decide, but I run my driver's license and hand it to my little neighbor kid and he takes off on it. Again, I know we're not responsible, but is there really any harm in foul in just saying helmets are required?
Thank you, Chad.
I did have one legal question. If we limit this to 2 or even 1, as was suggested, is it more of a franchise agreement than it is a
license agreement?
A licensing agreement? Do we need to be more concerned about restricting that? Again, I know council wants 2, but I can imagine there's going to be a 3rd, 4th, and 5th that might want to come in as well.
So you can, Mayor and Council, you can have restrictions on the number of entities. For example, we can have restrictions on the number of liquor licenses in the city. In this case, I'd have to look at the charter to see what the charter says about franchising and whether or not this would be classified under the charter for franchise. If it's not, a license agreement would be sufficient to cover what we need to do here.
Be kind of fun to have a franchise fee on. Never mind. I'm just looking for revenue. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
We got to get going.
All right. I think that's it. Does anybody else have questions before we go? All right. We'll get back together in about 5 minutes here for council meeting. Thank you.